Power suits and glass offices defined Atlas Tech, where CEO Arthur Kendall's word was law and success meant everything. Nobody glanced twice at Harold Wilson cleaning floors after hours, or his daughter Imani doing homework in quiet corners. Just a janitor and a 12-year-old girl, invisible among the ambitious. Then disaster struck. Systems crashed, security failed, and billions vanished in minutes. As executives pointed fingers and clients abandoned ship, the unthinkable happened. The janitor's daughter stepped forward, fingers flying across a keyboard, uncovering solutions that baffled senior engineers. In the silence that followed her impossible rescue, Arthur Kendall asked the question echoing through the room. Who is this girl? They were about to discover that brilliance doesn't care about titles, and sometimes the most extraordinary minds are found in the most ordinary places. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today, and if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Glass and steel stretched toward the sky, reflecting the morning sun across Atlas Tech's headquarters. Inside, the rhythm of keyboards and hushed voices created a symphony of corporate ambition, 70 floors of technological innovation, and on the executive level, Arthur Kendall stood at his window, watching the city wake up below him. The most fragile thing about success, Arthur murmured to his empty office, is how quickly it can shatter. He straightened his already perfect tie and checked his watch. 7 minutes until the most important meeting of the quarter. Atlas Tech wasn't just any tech corporation. It was the Tech Corporation, the company that governments, banks, and airlines couldn't function without. Their software deployment today would affect defense systems, global banking networks, and aviation control towers across 6 continents. There was no room for error. Arthur's reflection stared back at him from the glass, salt and pepper hair cut with military precision, eyes the color of a winter sky, and a mouth that rarely smiled. At 52, he'd built Atlas Tech from a 4-person startup into a titan that made billions look like pocket change. The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Kendall, they're ready for you in the Apex room." "On my way," he replied, gathering his tablet. The Apex room fell silent as Arthur entered. 20 of the company's top executives and engineers sat ramrod straight, watching him with a mixture of respect and trepidation. Brian Miller, the chief technology officer, stood at the head of the table with a presentation cued. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur began, his voice measured and cold. "What we launch today will either cement our dominance for the next decade or become our obituary. There is no middle ground." Brian flashed a confident smile. "The system is rock solid, Arthur. Every test has cleared, every vulnerability patched." Arthur's eyes narrowed slightly. "Is that so? Then why did I receive reports of anomalies in the test environment last night?" Brian's smile faltered for a split second. "Minor glitches. Nothing structural." "There are no minor glitches in systems that control air traffic, Brian. Only disasters waiting to happen." Arthur turned to the rest of the room. "Triple check everything. If this fails, we don't just lose money. People die." As the meeting continued, 11 floors below and several hours later, Harold Wilson moved quietly through the server room, pushing his cleaning cart. At 60, his face carried the lines of a man who had weathered much, but his eyes remained sharp and observant. The janitor's uniform he wore was pressed and spotless, a habit from his earlier life that he couldn't shake. "Dad, look at this one," whispered Imani, his 12-year-old daughter, pointing to one of the massive server stacks. The light pattern changed from yesterday. Harold smiled. Bringing Imani to work after school wasn't exactly company policy, but the night security guards had grown used to seeing the girl with her textbooks and bright orange headband, sitting quietly in the corner of whatever room her father was cleaning. "That's the new load balancer they installed," Harold explained, quietly. "See how it distributes processing power?" Imani nodded, her eyes wide with fascination. While other kids her age were glued to social media, Imani Wilson was sketching network architectures and reverse engineering algorithms on the back of her math homework. She'd inherited her father's mind, quick, analytical, always questioning. "Mr. Wilson," a sharp voice cut through the quiet hum of the servers. Brian Miller stood at the doorway, eyebrows raised. "I don't recall authorizing tours of our secure facilities." Harold straightened immediately. No tours, sir. Just finishing up. Here. Brian's eyes fell on Imani, who was quickly tucking away her notebook. This area requires security clearance. Your daughter doesn't have it. I understand, sir. We're leaving now. Brian watched them go, then shook his head dismissively before continuing down the hallway. He didn't even say hello, Imani whispered. Once they were in the elevator, Harold placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. Some people only see the uniform, not the person wearing it. The next morning, as developers streamed into the building, Lena Dawson sat alone in her cubicle, reviewing code for the upcoming launch. At 29, she was one of the youngest senior developers at Atlas Tech and one of the few women in the department. Her desk was a fortress of organization, color-coded notes, perfectly aligned monitors, and a small plant that somehow thrived under the fluorescent lights. Lena, did you fix that memory leak in the security protocol? Brian's voice boomed across the open workspace. She didn't look up from her screen. I submitted the patch yesterday along with a suggestion to optimize the authentication sequence. Did you see my notes? Brian waved dismissively. We don't have time for your theoretical improvements. The sequence works fine as is. It works, but it's inefficient. It's creating unnecessary load on... Listen, Brian cut her off, leaning over her desk. This isn't grad school. We ship what works, not what's perfect. Stick to fixing bugs, not reinventing the wheel. He strode away, leaving Lena fuming silently. A junior programmer at the next desk gave her a sympathetic look. He shot down my suggestion last week too, called it cute but impractical. Lena sighed. One day he's going to regret not listening. That evening, as most employees headed home, Lena stayed behind to run final tests on her segment of the code. The office was nearly empty when she heard a soft rustling sound from the break room. Curious, she peeked in to find Imani sitting alone at a table, surrounded by homework and a half-eaten sandwich. Hello there, Lena said, smiling. Working late? Imani looked up, slightly startled. My dad has to clean the executive floor tonight. I'm just waiting. Lena glanced at the papers spread across the table and froze. Among the math worksheets was a napkin covered in what looked like a complex algorithm, one that Lena recognized as similar to what her team had been struggling with for weeks. Did you draw this? She asked, pointing to the napkin. Imani nodded shyly. I was just playing around with some ideas. The way they structured the binary search tree in the training module seemed backward, so I was trying to fix it. Lena sat down across from her, genuinely intrigued. And did you? Fix it, I mean? I think so. Imani pushed the napkin toward her. If you balance it this way, the search time cuts in half. Lena studied the diagram, her eyes widening. The solution was elegant, simple, and, most frustratingly, something her team hadn't considered. This is brilliant, she said quietly. Where did you learn to think like this? Imani shrugged, embarrassed by the praise. I just like figuring out how stuff works. My dad taught me the basics, and I read a lot online. Before Lena could respond, Harold appeared at the door. Time to go, Imani. Your daughter has quite a mind for algorithms, Lena said, standing to introduce herself. Harold's expression remained neutral, but there was a flicker of pride in his eyes. She gets curious about things. That's an understatement, Lena smiled. At Imani. You should stop by my desk sometime. I'd love to show you what we're working on. As they left, Lena looked again at the napkin algorithm. Something about it nagged at her. Not just its brilliance, but how it seemed to address problems in Atlas Tech's system that weren't public knowledge. Later that night, in the empty building, a lone monitor in the server room flickered to life. A command prompt appeared, cursor blinking ominously. Text began to appear. System vulnerability. Detected initiating protocol. 7. This is only the beginning. The screen went dark again, its brief message seen by no one, except for Imani, who had snuck back to retrieve a forgotten textbook. She stood, frozen in the doorway, eyes wide, before quietly backing away. The next morning, Arthur summoned Brian to his office. We need to talk about redundancy measures for the launch. Brian rolled his eyes. We've been over this. The triple-layer backup system is overkill already. Is it? Arthur slid a tablet across his desk. Explain these anomalies in the log files. Brian glanced at the screen, his expression dismissive. Random glitches. Systems this complex always have noise in the data. And the encrypted communications that don't match our security protocols. Probably dev team testing without proper documentation. I'll have a word with them. Arthur stood, walking to the window. Brian, I selected you as CTO because you're brilliant, but brilliance without caution is just recklessness. He turned, his gaze steely. If this launch fails, so do you. Are we clear? Brian's jaw tightened. Crystal. That afternoon, Arthur joined a strategy lunch with his executive team. As they discussed final preparations, Harold quietly moved around the room, emptying trash bins and replacing water pitchers. Imani waited outside the door, a book in her lap. The firewall integrity tests are still showing inconsistencies. One executive mentioned. We've had the security team working round the clock, but they can't pinpoint the issue. Have they checked the routing tables? Brian asked. Could be a DNS issue. From the doorway, Imani's voice was barely audible. Or maybe the firewall is rerouting incorrectly based on the architecture design. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to the doorway where Imani stood, suddenly aware she'd spoken aloud. Brian let out a dismissive laugh. Well, I guess we can. I'll go home. The janitor's kid has solved our security issues. Arthur's expression didn't change, but his voice carried a sharp edge. Young lady, this isn't a classroom. Please wait outside. Harold quickly ushered Imani away, his face flushed with embarrassment. Kids, Brian chuckled. Next she'll be telling us how to optimize our quantum encryption. But Lena, who had been quietly taking notes, looked thoughtful. Later, she checked the firewall architecture against Imani's suggestion and found, to her amazement, that the girl might have been onto something. As midnight approached, Harold finished his shift and collected Imani from the break room where she'd fallen asleep on her textbooks. As they walked through the darkened hallways, Imani tugged at his sleeve. Dad, I saw something weird on the computer earlier. Harold slowed his pace. What kind of weird? A message. It said, this is only the beginning. And something about Protocol 7. Harold frowned. Probably just developers leaving notes for each other. Imani shook her head. It didn't feel like that. It felt wrong. Harold looked down at his daughter's worried face and felt a chill run through him. In his previous life, before janitorial work, before his wife's illness, he would have recognized the warning signs, but that was a lifetime ago. We'll tell someone tomorrow, he promised, but as they walked to the bus stop, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong at Atlas Tech. Launch day arrived with the bright promise of a perfect morning. The Atlas Tech headquarters buzzed with nervous energy as employees swiped into the building. In the main conference room, massive screens displayed news feeds from around the world, all covering the anticipated system deployment. Arthur Kendall stood at the center of the room, surrounded by his executive team and lead engineers. Client representatives watched remotely, their faces filling a wall of monitors. Billions of dollars in Atlas Tech's future reputation hung in the balance. Today, we redefine industry standards, Arthur announced, his voice calm and measured. You've all worked tirelessly to make this happen. Now execute flawlessly. It wasn't an inspirational speech. Arthur didn't believe in false motivation, but the room straightened nonetheless. Brian Miller moved confidently between workstations, checking final preparations. T-minus 15 minutes, people. Final diagnostics. Look perfect. Lena sat at her station, methodically running through her checklists. She glanced up to see Harold wheeling his cart past the glass walls, Imani trailing behind him. The girl caught her eye and gave a small wave. Initiate deployment sequence, Brian called out at exactly 9 a.m. The room held its collective breath as progress bars crawled across screens. Everything ran smoothly for the first 5 minutes. Status indicators glowed green. Client representatives nodded approvingly, then a single alert flashed red. Server cluster 3 showing latency, a developer called out. Brian waved dismissively. Expected during initial data migration, it'll stabilize. But the red alerts began to multiply. One screen, then 3, then a dozen. Warning symbols cascaded across the monitoring dashboard. Database integrity compromised, someone shouted. Firewall breach in Sector 7. Authentication protocols failing. The orderly room descended into chaos. Developers shouted diagnostic commands while others frantically typed, trying to isolate the failures. What the hell is happening? Arthur demanded, his voice cutting through the noise. Brian stared at the screens in disbelief. It's not possible. Everything was tested. A massive warning filled the main display. System integrity failure. Catastrophic data loss in progress. The client monitors showed stunned faces turning to anger. One by one, they began disconnecting from the call. Stop. The deployment, Arthur ordered. Roll back to yesterday's backup immediately. We can't, a system administrator replied, her voice shaking. The backup servers aren't responding. It's like they've been wiped clean. That's impossible, Brian snapped. We have 3 separate backup systems on isolated networks. Well, they're all compromised, the administrator shot back. Data logs show rollback commands executed at 3 a.m., but there's no record of who initiated them. Lena moved to a terminal, typing rapidly. It's worse than that. This isn't a glitch, it's an attack. Look at the pattern. It's systematic, targeting critical infrastructure first, then destroying recovery options. Arthur turned to Brian, his face a mask of cold fury. You assured me this couldn't happen. It can't. Brian's forehead glistened with sweat. Someone must have breached our security protocols from the inside. This has to be sabotage. As the accusations flew, Harold quietly guided Imani away from the chaos. We should go, he whispered. This isn't safe. But Imani's eyes were fixed on the screens, her mind racing through possibilities. Dad, I think I know what's happening. It's similar to what I saw last night. Not now, Imani, Harold urged. We need to leave. In the conference room, Brian pulled the security chief aside. Check the access logs. Find out who was in the server room last night. Already on it, the security chief replied. Preliminary logs show janitorial access around midnight. Brian's eyes narrowed. The janitor, Harold Wilson. I've caught him. In secure areas with his kid before. Check his badge records. Arthur overheard them. You think a janitor crashed our entire system? Not alone, Brian replied. But he could have helped someone, or been paid to look the other way. Arthur hesitated, then nodded to the security chief. Check it out, but be discreet. The discretion lasted exactly 7 minutes. 2 security guards burst into the janitor's closet where Harold was preparing cleaning supplies. They seized him by the arms, speaking into their radios. We've got him, bringing him up now. What is this? Harold demanded. Take your hands off me. Security breach protocol, one guard replied coldly. You're being detained for questioning. They marched him through the open office area, past stunned employees who stopped to stare. Imani, who had been waiting nearby, saw them and ran forward. Dad, what's happening? Dad, stay back, Imani, Harold called out as they pulled him into the elevator. Call your aunt, tell her what happened. Imani stood frozen, tears streaming down her face as the elevator doors closed. No one moved to comfort her. No one spoke. They all just returned to their screens as if nothing had happened, except Lena. She abandoned her terminal and rushed to Imani's side. Hey, it's going to be okay. They're just talking to him. Imani wiped her tears angrily. They think he did something wrong, but he didn't. He wouldn't. I know, Lena said, though she couldn't be sure. Come on, let's get you somewhere quiet. As they walked away, Brian's voice rose above the chaos. The attack is spreading. It's targeting client databases now. We're losing everything. The next hour passed in a blur of failed recovery attempts. Engineers tried every protocol in the book, but the malicious code stayed one step ahead, as if it knew their playbook. Arthur paced the room, barking orders that yielded no results. The stock price had already dropped 15% and was still falling. We need to make a statement, the communications director urged. Clients are panicking. The media is speculating. Tell them nothing until we understand what happened, Arthur replied. I won't have us making promises we can't keep. Meanwhile, in a quiet corner of the building, Imani sat with Lena's tablet on her lap. Can I try something? She asked quietly. Lena hesitated. Imani, this is serious. The entire company is— I know, Imani interrupted. But I've been watching how your systems work for months. The pattern looks familiar. Please? Against her better judgment, Lena logged into her developer account and handed over the tablet. Just don't break anything else. Imani's fingers flew across the screen, navigating through system architectures that most college graduates wouldn't understand. Her brow furrowed in concentration. There, she murmured. The attack is using the company's own security protocols against it. But there's a backup server node they missed, probably because it's older and uses a different architecture. Node 42? Lena asked incredulously. That's from our legacy system. It's barely connected to anything. Exactly, Imani said, her voice gaining confidence. If I can redirect power there and isolate it from the main network— She typed furiously, implementing a solution so unconventional that Lena could barely follow it. After several tense minutes, a small green indicator appeared. I've got access to one secure partition, Imani announced. About 10% of the core data is intact. It's not much, but it's something to build on. Lena stared at her in amazement, then grabbed her hand. Come with me. Now. They rushed back to the conference room, where desperation had given way to grim resignation. Arthur was on the phone with the board chair, likely explaining how billions in value had evaporated in hours. Mr. Kendall, Lena called out, pulling Imani forward. We found something. Arthur held up a finger, finished his call, then turned to them with irritation. Not now, Lena. And why is that child still here? Because she just did what our entire engineering team couldn't, Lena replied. She found a way to access the last uncorrupted server node. The room fell silent. All eyes turned to Imani, who suddenly looked very small in her school clothes and orange headband. That's absurd, Brian scoffed. She's, what, 10? 12, Imani corrected quietly. Show me, Arthur said, his tone making it clear he expected to be disappointed. Lena led Imani to the main terminal. With everyone watching, Imani repeated the process she'd used earlier. Commands flew across the screen as she navigated through the wreckage of Atlas Tech's infrastructure. Gradually, expressions around the room changed from skepticism to disbelief. A developer whispered to another, Is she writing custom shell commands on the fly? When the green indicator appeared showing access to the secure partition, a collective gasp rippled through the room. How did you do that? Arthur asked, his voice oddly quiet. The attack targeted newer systems, Imani explained, gaining confidence as she spoke. But there was an old server running backup protocols that didn't match the pattern. I isolated it before the virus could find it. Brian pushed forward. This is ridiculous. She must have had help. Probably from her father, who, may I remind everyone, had unauthorized access to our servers last night. My dad didn't do anything wrong, Imani said firmly. Arthur studied her face, then looked at the screen showing the recovered data. Who? Is this girl? He asked, not directing the question at anyone in particular. Brian moved to pull Imani away from the keyboard. This is a security breach. She shouldn't even be in this building, let alone accessing our systems. Arthur held up his hand, stopping Brian mid-motion. Wait. He turned to Imani. Can you recover more data? Imani nodded slowly. I think so. But I need help. The attack is still running and it will find this server eventually. Arthur made a decision. Lena, work with her. Brian, call off security. I want Harold Wilson brought here, not to a holding room. His eyes narrowed at Brian's protest. Now, as Brian stormed off, Arthur turned back to Imani, who was already typing again, her small fingers moving with surprising certainty across the keyboard. Let's see what you can do, he said quietly. The atmosphere in the conference room had transformed from chaos to cautious hope. Imani sat at the main terminal, her small fingers dancing across the keyboard while Lena leaned over her shoulder, occasionally offering guidance. A group of senior engineers hovered nearby, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. Arthur stood behind them all, arms crossed, watching the recovery numbers slowly climb. 10% had become 15, then 20. The system was far from stable, but it was no longer in free fall. The door opened and Harold was escorted in, not by security guards this time, but by Yasmin, Arthur's executive assistant. His eyes immediately found Imani, relief washing over his face. "Dad!" Imani jumped up and ran to him, wrapping her arms around his waist. "Are you okay?" Harold asked softly, checking her face as if searching for signs of distress. Arthur cleared his throat. "Mr. Wilson, we need to talk." He gestured toward a smaller adjoining room. Privately, Harold nodded, gently disengaging from Imani's embrace. "Stay with Lena," he told her. "I'll be right back." In the glass-walled meeting room, Arthur, Harold, and Brian sat around a small table. The tension was palpable. "Explain to me," Arthur began, his voice controlled but cold, "how your 12-year-old daughter knows more about our systems than our entire security team." Harold's face remained composed. "I taught her a little here and there. She picks things up quickly." Brian scoffed. "A little? She's navigating proprietary architectures and writing custom commands. That doesn't come from casual observation." "Mr. Wilson," Arthur leaned forward, "I'm trying to understand what's happening. Our entire system collapsed, and the only person who could find a solution was your daughter. I need the truth." Harold met his gaze steadily. "The truth is simple. Imani has always had a gift for patterns and systems. I showed her some basics of coding when she was 7, and she's been teaching herself ever since. When I bring her here, after school she watches, she learns. That doesn't explain her level of familiarity with our specific systems," Brian insisted. Arthur raised an eyebrow. "Unless those systems aren't as secure as you've claimed." Before Brian could respond, the door opened and Lena stepped in. "Mr. Kendall, Imani has stabilized the recovery partition. She says she can demonstrate how the attack bypassed our security if you want to see it." Arthur stood. "Show me." Back at the terminal, Imani had pulled up several diagnostic windows. The small crowd of engineers had grown, their whispers creating a background hum of speculation. "Can you walk us through what you found?" Arthur asked. Imani nodded, suddenly shy with so many eyes on her. "The main problem was in the launch protocol," she explained, pointing to a section of code. "There's a vulnerability here that lets someone insert malicious commands during the authentication sequence." Brian pushed forward. "That's impossible. I personally reviewed that code." "It's hidden really well," Imani continued unperturbed. "But if you look at the pattern of data packets, you can see where they're being redirected." She pulled up another window showing packet traces. "See these timestamps? They don't match." One of the senior engineers leaned closer, adjusting his glasses. "She's right. There's a discrepancy in the sequencing. And here," Imani pointed to another section, "is where I found a way to rethread the data flow through an older server node. The attack didn't target it because it wasn't in the main architecture diagram." Arthur turned to his team. "Can any of you verify this?" The engineers exchanged glances, then one stepped forward, a gray-haired woman who had been with the company since its founding. "The girl's analysis is sound, unconventional, but sound." Brian's face flushed with anger. "This is absurd. You're all being fooled by a parlor trick. She couldn't possibly understand our systems this well unless—" He turned to Harold. "Unless you gave her unauthorized access." "I never gave her access to anything," Harold replied firmly. "Then explain this." Brian gestured wildly at the screen where Imani had resumed typing, tracking down corrupt data packets. Lena stepped forward, a binder in her hands. "I can explain part of it." She opened the binder, revealing pages of handwritten notes and diagrams. "Imani gave me these last week. They're original solutions to optimization problems our team has been struggling with for months." She handed the binder to Arthur. "These predate the system crash. They're just insights. Pure problem solving." Arthur flipped through the pages, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked up at Harold. There's more to this story, isn't there? Harold sighed deeply. For a moment he seemed to be debating with himself. Then he nodded. Yes, but it's not what you think. The room fell silent as Harold began to speak, his voice soft, but clear. 15 years ago, I wasn't a janitor. I was studying computer engineering at MIT. I was on track for a doctorate when my wife, Layla, was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer. Imani looked up from the screen, her eyes sad, but proud as her father continued. We had no family. Nearby, no support system. The medical bills piled up. I dropped out to care for her and Imani, who was just a baby then. When Layla passed away, I had a choice. Restart my career or be there for my daughter. Harold's eyes found Imani's. It wasn't really a choice at all. So you became a janitor, Arthur said, understanding dawning in his eyes. It paid the bills and gave me regular hours. I could be home when Imani needed me. Harold shrugged. And yes, I taught her what I knew about coding. The rest she figured out herself, just by watching and reading. The room was silent as everyone processed this revelation. Even Brian seemed momentarily at a loss for words. Arthur broke the silence. Mr. Wilson, Harold, I apologize for the way you were treated today. It seems we've all been making assumptions. He turned to Imani. And you, young lady, have quite a gift. Thank you, sir, Imani replied quietly. Now, Arthur straightened, once again the CEO in command. We have a company to save. I want a full report on the extent of the damage within the hour, and I want to know how this happened. As the team dispersed to their assignments, Arthur pulled Harold aside. I'd like Imani to continue working with Lena, under supervision, of course, and only if you agree. Harold hesitated. She's just a child, Mr. Kendall. A child who just saved $10 billion worth of data, Arthur replied. We'll compensate her time, naturally, and yours. While they spoke, the Atlas Tech Board of Directors had convened an emergency meeting in response to the crisis. The video conference screen showed 8 grim faces, all demanding explanations. Gentlemen, ladies, Arthur addressed them calmly. We've contained the breach and begun recovery procedures. The situation is stabilizing. Stabilizing, echoed Lawrence Porter, the board chair. Our stock has dropped 20% in 2 hours. Clients are threatening to sue. The media is calling it the biggest tech failure of the decade. It was a sophisticated attack, Arthur replied. But we've identified the vulnerability and, from what I hear, interrupted another board member, you had to rely on a janitor's child to save your systems. Is that true, Arthur? Arthur's jaw tightened. Partially. The girl has exceptional abilities that proved useful in identifying a recovery path. This is a PR nightmare waiting to happen, Porter said. We need to suppress this angle completely. The public can't know that Atlas Tech was saved by a child. I disagree, Arthur said firmly. In fact, I think there's a compelling story here about recognizing talent in unexpected places. Are you insane? Porter exploded. It makes us look incompetent. No, Arthur replied coldly. What makes us look incompetent is that our systems were compromised in the first place. As for the girl, I'm inclined to let the chips fall where they may. After ending the call with the disgruntled board, Arthur returned to the main floor where recovery efforts continued. Lena and Imani had set up at a workstation slightly apart from the others. How's it coming? He asked. We've recovered about 30% of the core data, Lena reported. And Imani found something interesting in the access logs. Imani pulled up a display showing login timestamps. There's weird activity here from last week. Someone was accessing core scripts during non-business hours, but the logs were altered to hide it. Arthur studied the screen. Can you trace who did it? Not directly, Imani said. But I can follow the digital trail. Whoever did this knew exactly where our vulnerabilities were. It feels deliberate. Harold, who had been quietly observing from nearby, stepped closer. It is deliberate, he said softly. This isn't just a system failure or random hack. I know sabotage when I see it. Arthur's eyes narrowed. You're certain? Harold nodded. The pattern is too precise, too knowledgeable about your specific architecture. This was an inside job. The gravity of Harold's assessment hung in the air. If true, it meant someone within Atlas Tech had deliberately crashed their own systems. Someone with high-level access and intimate knowledge of their security protocols. Arthur made a quick decision. Lena, I want you and Imani to continue recovery efforts, but I also want you to search for evidence of internal tampering. Full access, limited window. He turned to Harold. I'd like you to advise them. Your perspective might be valuable. Of course, Harold agreed. As they worked into the evening, Imani became increasingly focused on a series of encrypted files that had been created shortly before the system crash. These shouldn't be here, she murmured. They're hidden inside the authentication protocol, but they're not part of the original code. Lena leaned in. Can you decrypt them? I'm trying, but... Imani's voice trailed off as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Wait, I think I found something. On the screen, a file opened, revealing lines of malicious code designed to corrupt data pathways throughout the Atlas Tech network. But more importantly, embedded in the file was a digital signature, a unique identifier used internally to track code modifications. That's impossible, Lena whispered, staring at the signature. Imani looked up, her eyes wide. What does it mean? It means we know who did this, Lena said, her voice hardening. That's Brian Miller's developer signature. Are you absolutely certain? Imani asked, her voice barely above a whisper as she stared at the screen displaying Brian's digital signature. Lena nodded grimly. Each developer at Atlas Tech has a unique identifier that's attached to any code they write or modify. It's like a fingerprint, impossible to fake from the outside. She pointed to the signature embedded in the malicious file. This code was written by Brian, or at least from his authenticated workstation. Imani's mind raced. We need to verify this before telling anyone. If we're wrong, we won't be, Lena said firmly. She pulled up the company archives and began cross-referencing the signature against Brian's previous work. After several tense minutes, she sat back. It's a match, 100%. But why would he crash his own company's systems? Imani asked, bewildered. He's the CTO. That's what we need to find out. Lena closed the file and secured their workstation. Come on, we need to tell your dad and Mr. Kendall. They found Harold and Arthur in a quiet corner of the executive floor, reviewing recovery statistics. Arthur looked up as they approached, noting their serious expressions. You found something, he said. It wasn't a question. Yes, Lena replied cautiously. But it's sensitive. Is there somewhere we can speak privately? Arthur led them to his office and closed the door. Tell me. Lena explained what they'd discovered, the encrypted files, the malicious code, and most damning of all, Brian's digital signature. As she spoke, Arthur's expression hardened from concern to cold fury. If this is true, he said when she finished, it's not just corporate sabotage, it's criminal. It's true, Lena confirmed. I've verified the signature against company records. Arthur paced the length of his office, thinking, we need to be careful here. Brian has allies on the board, and accusing the CTO of sabotage without ironclad proof could backfire spectacularly. What if we set a trap? Imani suggested quietly. All eyes turned to her. What kind of trap? Arthur asked. We could make him think we're still struggling with recovery but secretly watch what he does next, Imani explained. If he's the saboteur, he'll probably try to finish what he started or cover his tracks. Harold looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and concern. That's actually a solid strategy. Arthur nodded slowly. It could work. But we'll need to be subtle. Brian's no fool. They spent the next hour crafting their plan. Lena would create a dummy server environment that appeared to contain recovering data, while Imani set up a hidden monitoring system to track Brian's access attempts. Arthur would keep Brian distracted with recovery meetings while Harold used his after-hours access to place discreet monitoring devices. Remember, Arthur cautioned, we need absolute proof. Suspicion isn't enough. As they prepared to implement their plan, Yasmin, Arthur's assistant, knocked and entered the office. Mr. Kendall, I have those budget reports you asked for. She paused, noting the serious mood. Is everything all right? Arthur hesitated, then made a decision. Yasmin, close the door. We could use your help with something sensitive. Yasmin had been Arthur's right hand for 5 years, discreet, efficient, and fiercely loyal to the company. As Arthur explained, their suspicions about Brian, her expression grew troubled. Actually, she said when he finished, this might make sense of something I've been tracking. She opened her tablet and pulled up a spreadsheet. There have been discrepancies in Brian's department budgeting for the past 3 months. Small amounts moved between accounts, nothing that would trigger an audit, but the pattern seemed odd. What kind of pattern? Lena asked. Funds allocated to phantom projects, equipment purchases with no delivery records, consultant fees to companies. I can't verify exist. Yasmin highlighted several entries. I was planning to bring it to your attention next week, Mr. Kendall. Arthur's expression darkened further. Financial irregularities and system sabotage. The question is, why? Maybe he's working for someone else, Harold suggested quietly. Like a competitor, Lena agreed. Helix One has been trying to poach our talent for years, Arthur nodded grimly. All the more reason to catch him red-handed. Let's proceed with the plan. Over the next 2 days, their trap took shape. To the rest of Atlas Tech, it appeared that recovery efforts were struggling. Arthur announced that certain critical modules might be permanently lost, and the engineering team was working round the clock on a partial rebuild. Meanwhile, Brian grew increasingly agitated. He was seen checking server logs frequently, questioning engineers about recovery methods, and spending late nights alone in his office. He's nervous, Yasmin reported after observing him in a budget meeting. Kept checking his phone, barely paid attention to the discussion. On the 3rd morning, Imani's monitoring system pinged an alert. He's accessing the dummy server, she told Lena excitedly. And he's trying to run a deletion script on what he thinks is our recovered data. Lena watched the access logs in real time. We've got him. Look, he's using the same method as before, trying to embed the attack in this authentication protocol. Imani quickly rerouted the data tunnel, capturing a complete record of Brian's actions. We should tell Mr. Kendall right away. Arthur didn't waste time. He immediately called an emergency meeting with the board of directors, security chief, and legal counsel. Brian was summoned last, told only that they needed to discuss recovery progress. When Brian entered the boardroom, he found a grim-faced group waiting for him. Arthur stood at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Brian, he began calmly, would you care to explain why you attempted to delete our recovered data? This morning? The color drained from Brian's face. What? That's ridiculous! I was running diagnostic tests, not... Diagnostics don't include malicious code designed to corrupt database architecture, Arthur interrupted, sliding a tablet toward him. This is a complete log of your activities, along with your digital salvo signature on the original attack code. Brian stared at the evidence, his mind visibly racing for an explanation. This is fabricated. Someone's framing me. The security team has verified the authenticity of all records, Arthur continued implacably. Your credentials were used to access restricted areas 72 hours before the crash. Your signature is on the attack code. And this morning you attempted to finish what you started. This is absurd. Brian slammed his fist on the table. I've given everything to this company. Why would I sabotage it? 10 million reasons, Lena said quietly from the corner where she stood with Imani and Harold. She stepped forward and placed another tablet on the table. We found this in your cloud storage, a contract offer from Helix One, dated 2 weeks ago. 10 million in stock options, CTO position, guaranteed board seat. Brian's face contorted with rage and desperation. You had no right to access my personal files. Actually, Arthur replied coldly, our terms of employment give us every right when corporate sabotage is suspected. He nodded to Lena, who tapped her tablet. The room's main screen lit up with a video, Brian in his office, speaking on an encrypted line. The system will be crippled for weeks. By the time they recover, if they recover, Atlas Tech's valuation will be cut in half. Helix One can swoop in for the acquisition at a bargain price, and you'll have your competitors eliminated without the antitrust issues. It's win-win. The video ended, leaving a deafening silence in the room. How did you... Brian began, then stopped, realizing the depth of his predicament. Imani's monitoring system caught more than just your deletion attempts, Lena explained. It recorded everything you did on company devices. Brian's eyes darted to Imani, who stood quietly beside her father. This is because of a child? You're destroying my career based on some janitor's kid playing detective? Harold stepped forward, his voice steady. No, Mr. Miller, you destroyed your own career when you betrayed the company that trusted you. Before Brian could respond, the boardroom door opened and 2 security officers entered. Behind them stood a man in a dark suit who introduced himself as corporate security liaison with the Federal Cybercrime Division. Brian Miller, he said formally. We need you to come with us for questioning regarding violations of the Computer Fraud and Abuse Act. As Brian was escorted out, still protesting his innocence, Harold quietly approached Arthur. There's something else you should know, he said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small USB drive. I found this hidden in a ceiling vent, in the server room 3 weeks ago. I didn't think much of it at the time, thought maybe it was lost by an IT tech. Arthur took the drive carefully. And now? Now I think it might contain the original worm code Brian planted, Harold said, the physical access point for the attack. Arthur stared at the small device that had nearly destroyed his company. Have you told anyone else about this? Harold shook his head. Only Imani. She recognized it might be important after we found Brian's signature. Arthur nodded, tucking the drive into his pocket. Thank you. This could be the final piece of evidence we need. He turned to address the board members who were still processing the morning's revelations. Ladies and gentlemen, I suggest we take a short recess. When we return, we need to discuss damage control and next steps. As the room cleared, news of Brian's arrest spread throughout Atlas Tech. Employees gathered in small groups, whispering about the betrayal. The stock price, which had been in free fall since the crash, stabilized slightly as word leaked that the sabotage had been contained and the perpetrator caught. Later that evening, as twilight painted the city skyline in shades of purple and gold, Arthur stood alone on the executive balcony contemplating the day's events. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to find Harold approaching. Imani's just finishing up with Lena, Harold said. They think they can restore about 60% of the affected systems by morning. Arthur nodded. Not bad, considering where we were 3 days ago. He paused, looking out over the city. You know, Harold, it's not lost on me that a janitor and a 12-year-old girl just saved my company. Harold smiled slightly. Life has a way of surprising us. Indeed it does, Arthur agreed. He turned to face Harold directly. I'd like to offer you a position more commensurate with your skills. Our R&D department could use someone with your background. Harold shook his head. I appreciate that, Mr. Kendall, but my priority is still Imani. The night shift works for us right now. I understand, Arthur said, but the offer remains open, and as for Imani, she has extraordinary potential. I'd like to discuss some possibilities for her future, with your permission. She is extraordinary, Harold agreed, pride evident in his voice. But she's also still a child. Arthur nodded. Of course, everything at its proper time. He extended his hand. Thank you, Harold, for everything. As they shook hands, the last light of day glinted off the glass towers of the city, a world that had nearly come crashing down, saved by the most unexpected heroes. The morning light streamed through the glass walls of Atlas Tech's executive floor, bringing with it a sense of cautious renewal. A week had passed since Brian's arrest, and while the company was far from recovered, the immediate crisis had stabilized. The stock price had climbed back to 60% of its pre-crash value, and clients were cautiously returning after Arthur's personal assurances of security. Arthur sat at his desk, reviewing the latest recovery reports. Despite round-the-clock efforts, only about 70% of the lost data was recoverable. The rest would need to be rebuilt from scratch, a monumental task that would take months. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. Lena stood in the doorway, looking tired but determined. "Come in," Arthur said, gesturing to the chair across from him. "How's the rebuild coming?" "Slower than we'd like, but we're making progress." Lena placed a tablet on his desk. "I've finalized the recovery architecture plan. We can start implementing as soon as you approve." Arthur skimmed the document, impressed by the elegant solution Lena had designed. "This is excellent work." "Thank you. You, sir." Lena hesitated, then added, "I had some help from Imani. Her approach to the hybrid security layer is unconventional, but brilliant." Arthur set down the tablet and studied Lena thoughtfully. In the chaos of the past week, she had emerged as a natural leader, steady under pressure, innovative in crisis, and respected by the engineering team. "Lena," he said finally, "I'd like to offer you the position of Interim Chief Technology Officer." Surprise flickered across her face. "Sir, you've demonstrated exceptional skill and judgment during this crisis. The team respects you, and frankly, we need someone with integrity in that role right now." Lena took a deep breath. "I'm honored, Mr. Kendall. But I have to ask, why interim?" Arthur smiled slightly. "Standard procedure. 6 months to prove yourself, then we make it permanent. But between us," he leaned forward, "I have no doubt you'll succeed." Lena nodded, processing the opportunity. "In that case, I accept. With one condition." "Which is?" "Imani stays involved in the rebuild. Not full-time, of course, she's still a child. But her insights have been invaluable." Arthur considered this request. "That would be irregular. The board is already uncomfortable with how much access she's had." "The board wasn't here when she saved our systems," Lena pointed out. "And they don't understand what we're up against with this rebuild." Arthur nodded slowly. "Fair point. All right. She can shadow the development team on a limited basis, with proper supervision and her father's approval." "Thank you," Lena said, standing to leave. "And sir, you were right about Brian from the beginning. I should have trusted your instincts." "We all missed the signs," Arthur replied. "What matters now is rebuilding, better and stronger than before." Later that day, Imani sat in a small conference room with Lena and a group of senior developers. Despite being dressed in jeans and her trademark orange headband, she spoke with surprising confidence as she outlined her approach to rebuilding the lost framework. "If we use a hybrid architecture like this," she explained, pointing to a diagram she'd sketched, "we can integrate the salvaged legacy code with the new security protocols without creating additional vulnerabilities." One of the older developers frowned. "That's not standard practice. The integration points would be complex." "Yes," Imani agreed, "but the standard approach is exactly what Brian would expect us to do. If there are any other surprises waiting in the system, they'll be designed to target conventional rebuilds." The team exchanged glances, considering her logic. Finally, the lead architect spoke. "It's unorthodox, but she has a point, and given what we've been through, unorthodox might be exactly what we need." As the meeting concluded, Lena pulled Imani aside. "That was impressive. Where did you learn to present technical concepts like that?" Imani shrugged. "My dad. He always says, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." Outside the Atlas Tech building, a small group of reporters had gathered. Word had leaked about the child genius who had helped save the company, and media interest was growing by the day. "Is it true that a 12-year-old girl discovered the sabotage? Can you confirm reports that Brian Miller was working for Helix One? Is Atlas Tech planning to hire the janitor's daughter as a consultant?" Arthur ignored the questions as he strode into the building, but he knew the story couldn't be contained forever. By afternoon, several major tech blogs had run stories with headlines like, "12-year-old tech prodigy saves multi-billion-dollar corporation," and "The janitor's daughter, Silicon Valley's newest wunderkind." The Atlas Tech board of directors was not pleased. In an emergency video conference, several members expressed their concerns. "This makes us look incompetent," argued Lawrence Porter. "The narrative should be about our resilience as a company, not some child savior." "The media is romanticizing this," another board member added. But what happens when investors start questioning why we needed a child to solve our problems? Enough, Arthur interrupted firmly. Imani Wilson did what our entire security team couldn't. She found a solution when all of you were ready to write off billions in assets. I won't diminish her contribution to protect our collective ego. This isn't about ego, Arthur, Porter retorted. It's about the company's image. Having a child involved at this level appears unprofessional at best, desperate at worst. Arthur's voice dropped to a dangerous quiet. She's done more for this company than all of you put together. And let me be clear, if you push this issue, I'll take it public. How do you think shareholders will react when they learn the board wanted to silence the person who saved 30% of our market value? The threat hung in the air, leaving the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. Finally, Porter sighed. Fine, but keep her involvement limited and supervised. We don't need any more surprises. As word of Imani's role spread throughout the company, she found herself the center of increasing attention. Engineers would stop by to ask her opinion on code solutions. Executives wanted to meet the girl who had saved critical systems. Even the cafeteria staff knew her by name, setting aside her favorite apple juice when she visited. The pressure began to mount. During a system rebuild presentation to the executive team, Imani froze momentarily when asked to explain a particularly complex integration point. The room fell silent, waiting. Lena noticed her hesitation and quietly moved closer. Don't be afraid of your own light, she whispered. Just explain it the way you understand it. Imani took a deep breath, then proceeded to break down the concept in terms so clear that even the non-technical executives nodded in understanding. When she finished, Arthur gave her a small nod of approval that made her stand a little taller. That afternoon, a distinguished visitor arrived at Atlas Tech, Professor James Alden, a renowned AI researcher from MIT. He requested a meeting with Arthur, who was surprised by the visit, but curious enough to agree. I read about your recent troubles, Professor Alden explained, settling into a chair in Arthur's office, and about the young girl who helped solve the problem. When I saw her father's name, Harold Wilson, I had to come see for myself. You know Harold? Arthur asked, intrigued. Knew him years ago, Alden replied. He was one of my most promising students at MIT. Brilliant mind, innovative approach to algorithmic design. Then he suddenly dropped out in his third year. I tried to contact him, but he'd simply vanished. Arthur leaned back, processing this new information. He left to care for his wife. She was ill. Alden nodded sadly. I suspected something like that. Harold was not the type to abandon his studies without good reason. He paused. And now his daughter appears to have inherited his exceptional abilities. More than inherited, Arthur replied. From what I've seen, she may surpass him. She has an intuitive understanding of systems that I've never encountered before, in a child or an adult. I'd very much like to meet her, Alden said, and reconnect with Harold if possible. Arthur arranged for them to join a small working session in the development lab. When Harold saw Professor Alden, he froze, recognition and something like embarrassment crossing his face. Professor, he said quietly, it's been a long time. Too long, Harold, Alden replied, extending his hand. Though I must say, finding you working as a janitor was the last thing I expected. Harold shook his hand firmly. Life takes unexpected turns. So I see, Alden said, turning his attention to Imani, who was watching the exchange with curiosity. And this must be your daughter. I've heard remarkable things about you, young lady. Thank you, sir, Imani replied politely. Are you really from MIT? My dad told me that's where the best engineers go. Alden smiled. Some of them, yes, though it seems not all brilliant minds need a classroom to flourish. As Imani showed Professor Alden her approach to rebuilding Atlas Tech's security protocols, Harold pulled Arthur aside. I should have mentioned my background sooner, he said quietly. It wasn't my intention to mislead you. Arthur shook his head. You had nothing to prove to me or anyone else. But I am curious. You could have had a very different career. Do you ever regret your choice? Harold watched his daughter explaining complex code structures to one of the world's leading computer scientists. Not for a moment, he said softly. It was the right choice. Later that evening, Arthur invited Harold and Professor Alden to his office for a drink. As they talked, Arthur learned more about Harold's past, how he had helped design revolutionary predictive algorithms as a student, how his work had laid the groundwork for several key innovations in the field. The academic world lost a significant contributor when you left, Alden told Harold, though it seems your daughter may pick up where you left off. She's still very young, Harold cautioned. She needs a normal childhood, not the pressure of the tech world. Arthur, who had been listening thoughtfully, spoke up. What if there was a middle path? Professor, you still run the Weekend Innovation Lab at MIT, correct? Alden nodded. Every Saturday, a small group of exceptional students working on independent projects. And Harold, you're concerned about Imani having a normal life, but also want to nurture her talents? Arthur continued. Harold nodded cautiously. Yes, but I'm not sure where you're going with this. What if Imani spent weekends at the Innovation Lab? She could learn from Professor Alden, explore her interest in a structured environment, but still attend her regular school and maintain a normal routine. The suggestion hung in the air as Harold considered it. That would mean traveling to Boston every weekend. Atlas Tech would cover all expenses, Arthur said smoothly. Consider it an investment in the future, hers and ours. After further discussion, Harold cautiously agreed to a trial period. Imani was ecstatic when told of the arrangement, peppering Professor Alden with questions about the lab and the projects she might work on. Meanwhile, Atlas Tech's main competitor, Helix One, had not remained idle during the crisis. Their PR team launched a carefully orchestrated campaign highlighting Atlas Tech's catastrophic system failure and questioning whether clients could trust a company with such fundamental security flaws. When Arthur saw the press release, his expression hardened. They're trying to capitalize on our misfortune, the same misfortune they engineered through Brian. Should we respond? Yasmin asked. Marketing has prepared several counterstatements. Arthur shook his head. No, we won't engage in a PR war. We'll respond with results and integrity, not spin. He stood, straightening his tie. Schedule a press conference for next week. It's time we controlled our own narrative. In the weeks that followed, Imani began splitting her time between school, Atlas Tech, and weekend trips to MIT. Under Professor Alden's guidance, she flourished, absorbing complex concepts with remarkable speed and developing her own unique approaches to computational problems. During one Saturday session at the Innovation Lab, Imani had a breakthrough. Working with quantum pattern theory, a field still in its theoretical stages, she developed a new encryption method that combined traditional binary logic with quantum-inspired layering. This is extraordinary, Professor Alden said, reviewing her work. You've created a practical application for a theory that most of my doctoral students still struggle to understand. Imani beamed at the praise. It just made sense to me. The patterns wanted to fit together this way. When she returned to Atlas Tech on Monday, Imani shared her encryption method with Lena, who immediately recognized its potential for the company's new security framework. If this works at scale, Lena said, studying the code, it could revolutionize our entire approach to data protection. By the end of the month, Imani's encryption method had been integrated into Atlas Tech's core security protocol, providing a level of protection that even the most sophisticated hackers would struggle to breach. It was the final piece in the company's rebuilding effort, a unique innovation born from the mind of a 12-year-old girl who had once been invisible to the corporate world around her. The mood at Atlas Tech had shifted from crisis management to cautious optimism. With 80% of systems restored and Imani's revolutionary encryption method protecting their core architecture, the company was preparing for a grand relaunch. Client confidence was returning, and the stock price had recovered to nearly pre-crash levels. In the Central Development Lab, Lena stood before a wall of monitors displaying the new system architecture. Final security checks are complete, she announced to the team. We're ready for Phase 1 deployment tomorrow. Scattered applause broke out among the tired but proud developers. They had worked tirelessly for weeks, rebuilding what had been lost and enhancing what remained. Great work, everyone, Lena continued. This system isn't just a recovery, it's a complete evolution. Stronger, more secure, and more efficient than anything we've had before. As the team dispersed, Imani approached, Lena with a tablet in hand. I finished the documentation for the quantum layered encryption. Do you want to review it before tomorrow? Lena smiled. Absolutely. Let's grab some lunch and go through it together. They settled in the executive dining room, a perk Arthur had insisted Imani should share despite objections from some board members. As they reviewed the documentation, Arthur joined them briefly. How are we looking for tomorrow? He asked, helping himself to coffee. On track, Lena confirmed. The preliminary tests all passed with flying colors. Imani's encryption method performed exceptionally well against our simulation attacks. Arthur nodded approvingly. Excellent. The board is still nervous, but I've assured them this relaunch will restore full client confidence. He glanced at his watch. I need to prepare for the investor call. Keep me updated if anything changes. As he walked away, Imani turned to Lena. He seems less, scary now. Lena laughed. Arthur, he's always been intense but fair. I think this whole experience has changed him, though. Made him see things, and people, differently. Their conversation was interrupted by a sudden commotion from the development lab. Running back, they found developers gathered around the main monitoring station, expressions of disbelief and horror on their faces. What's happening? Lena demanded, pushing through the crowd. We're under attack again, a senior developer replied, pointing to the screen where red warning indicators were multiplying rapidly. It started in the new modules, the ones Imani helped design. They're being targeted specifically. Lena's blood ran cold. That's impossible. Those modules are protected by the quantum layered encryption. No one could break that without insider knowledge. Imani finished quietly, staring at the screen. Someone knows exactly how I built it. The attack was different this time, more surgical than the previous one. Instead of bringing down the entire system, it specifically targeted the newly built architecture, corrupting data pathways, and inserting backdoor access points throughout the security framework. Shut it down, Lena ordered. Isolate all affected nodes and initiate the emergency containment protocol. As the team scrambled to contain the damage, Arthur stormed into the lab, his face a mask of controlled fury. I just got pulled out of an investor call because our systems are failing again. What the hell is happening? Lena quickly briefed him on the situation. This isn't random, Arthur. Someone is deliberately targeting our new architecture, specifically the components Imani helped design. Arthur's gaze sharpened. Brian is in custody. Who else would have both the motive and the capability? Someone at Helix 1, Lena suggested. Brian must have shared details with them before he was caught. Or there's another insider we haven't identified, Arthur said grimly. Yasmin, start a complete audit of all employee access logs for the past month. I want to know who's been viewing the new architecture designs. Yasmin nodded and left quickly, her normally composed demeanor showing signs of strain. As the day progressed, the security team managed to contain the attack, but not before significant damage had been done. The relaunch would need to be delayed by at least 2 weeks while they assessed the damage and rebuilt the affected components. That evening, Yasmin sat alone in her office, meticulously reviewing employee access logs. Most showed expected patterns: developers accessing code repositories, managers reviewing progress reports, executives checking status updates. But one name kept appearing in unexpected places: Mark Sanders, the DevOps lead who had taken over many of Brian's responsibilities after his arrest. Yasmin flagged these anomalies and continued searching, expanding her investigation to include network traffic logs. There she found something even more disturbing: encrypted communication sent from within Atlas Tech to an external server that matched Helix 1's network signature. She was about to report her findings to Arthur when she noticed something odd about the timing. The communications always occurred during board meetings or executive sessions, times when certain high-level employees would be otherwise occupied and unlikely to be sending external messages. Digging deeper, Yasmin cross-referenced the communication times with the building's access logs. To her shock, she discovered that board member Ellis McGraw had been accessing the system from unusual locations within the building during those exact time frames, locations far from the boardroom where he should have been. He's been using the meetings as cover, she whispered to herself. But why would a board member sabotage his own company? Instead of going directly to Arthur, Yasmin decided to gather more evidence. She quietly began tracking Ellis's digital footprint, documenting every unusual access and communication. Meanwhile, Imani had been analyzing the attack pattern with growing concern. "Lena," she said finally, "I think I know what's happening. The attack code is mimicking my style, using the same approaches and shortcuts I use when I write code." Lena frowned. "Are you saying someone is trying to frame you?" "It looks that way," Imani replied, pointing to specific sections of the malicious code. "See these patterns? This is how I structure my for loops. And this recursive function, it's almost exactly like one I wrote last week. But who would have access to your code samples and the skill to replicate your style?" Imani shook her head. "I don't know. But whoever it is, they want people to think I'm responsible." Word of the second. Attacks spread quickly throughout the company, and suspicion began to swirl. Several board members questioned whether Imani's continued involvement was appropriate, suggesting that perhaps her access to critical systems had somehow enabled the breach. When Arthur heard these whispers, he called an immediate press conference, against the advice of his communications team. "Atlas Tech has always prided itself on transparency and integrity," he told the assembled reporters. "Yes, we experienced another targeted attack yesterday. No, it will not derail our recovery. And let me address the rumors head on. If you think I'd trust a multi-billion-dollar company to a child, you'd be wrong. I'm trusting it to a genius, one whose contributions have been invaluable in protecting our clients' data." The declaration made headlines across tech media, effectively silencing the internal criticism, but it also painted a target on Imani's back, making her the public face of Atlas Tech's recovery efforts. Harold was not pleased. "You've put my daughter in the spotlight," he told Arthur after the press conference. "She's 12 years old, Arthur. She should be worrying about math homework, not corporate espionage." "I understand your concern," Arthur replied, "but the rumors were already spreading. If I hadn't addressed them directly, they would have festered and grown. This way, at least, the narrative is clear. Imani is an asset, not a liability." Harold remained unconvinced. "She's also a child, my child, and her safety comes first." While this conversation was taking place, Ellis McGraw was calling for an emergency board meeting. "Arthur's unilateral actions have gone too far," he told Lawrence Porter by phone. "The press conference was a disaster, associating our recovery with a child prodigy. It makes us look desperate." "I agree it was ill-advised," Porter replied cautiously, "but calling for an emergency vote to remove him as CEO seems extreme, especially given our current situation." "The situation he created," Ellis countered. "Look, Lawrence, we need decisive leadership right now, not sentimental stories about janitors and child geniuses. The shareholders deserve better." Porter sighed. "I'll schedule the meeting for tomorrow morning, but I'm not promising my vote. Ellis, Arthur has his flaws, but he's steered us through worse crises than this." Ellis ended the call with a satisfied smile. By tomorrow afternoon, he would be acting CEO of Atlas Tech, and his friends at Helix One would be very pleased indeed. What Ellis didn't know was that Yasmin had been quietly tracking his digital movements for days. She had uncovered a trail of encrypted communications between him and Helix One executives dating back months, long before Brian's sabotage. The evidence suggested a coordinated effort to undermine Atlas Tech from within, with both Brian and Ellis working as Helix One's agents. Yasmin took her findings directly to Lena, who immediately recognized their significance. "This explains so much," Lena said, reviewing the evidence. "Ellis has been on the board for years. He would have access to everything: security protocols, strategic plans, financial projections, and he's been selling it all to Helix One," Yasmin added, while simultaneously short-selling Atlas Tech stock before each attack. They brought the evidence to Arthur just hours before the emergency board meeting. His expression grew darker with each damning detail. "So Brian was just the fall guy," he said finally. "The public face of the sabotage while Ellis pulled the strings from the shadows. It appears so, Lena confirmed. And now he's trying to oust you to complete the takeover. Arthur's jaw set in determination. Not if I have anything to say about... The emergency board meeting began with Ellis McGraw presenting his case for new leadership. He spoke passionately about Atlas Tech's need for a steady hand and traditional leadership approach, subtly criticizing Arthur's recent decisions without naming him directly. When he finished, Arthur stood. Before we vote, I'd like to address the board. He moved to the front of the room, tablet in hand. Ellis has painted a compelling picture of a company in need of new direction. What he failed to mention is his own role in creating the very crises he now criticizes. Ellis frowned. What are you talking about? Arthur activated the main screen, displaying a timeline of encrypted communications between Ellis and Helix One executives. This is a record of your contact with our main competitor over the past 6 months. Note the dates. Each coincides with a major security event or stock price fluctuation. The board members shifted uncomfortably, exchanging shocked glances. This is absurd, Ellis protested. You're manufacturing evidence to save your position. Am I? Arthur replied coldly. He switched to another screen showing Ellis's trading records. These are your stock transactions, Ellis. Short-selling Atlas Tech shares just before each security incident. Quite profitable, wasn't it? Ellis stood abruptly. This meeting is over. I won't sit here and be slandered. Actually, came a new voice from the doorway. The meeting is just getting interesting. Professor Alden entered, followed by 2 men in suits. I took the liberty of forwarding your evidence to some colleagues at the Corporate Securities Division. They were most interested in the pattern of insider trading. The 2 men approached Ellis, who had gone pale. Ellis McGraw, we need you to come with us for questioning regarding violations of federal securities laws. As Ellis was escorted from the room, the remaining board members sat in stunned silence. Finally, Lawrence Porter spoke up. Arthur, I think I speak for all of us when I say we owe you an apology. It seems we've been harboring a viper in our midst. Arthur nodded curtly. What matters now is moving forward. Helix One has been attempting a hostile takeover through sabotage and insider manipulation. That ends today. The news of Ellis's arrest broke during a shareholders' summit, causing a brief panic followed by a surge of relief when the full story emerged. Atlas Tech was not failing. It had been targeted in a coordinated attack by its main competitor. With the threat removed, confidence in the company's recovery soared. Back at home that evening, Harold watched his daughter with concern. The stress of the past weeks had taken its toll. Imani was exhausted, falling asleep surrounded by pages of code and system diagrams she'd been studying. Gently, he removed the papers and covered her with a blanket. Your mother would have been proud, he whispered, smoothing her hair. So proud. In that quiet moment, Harold made a decision. He would allow Imani to continue her work with Atlas Tech and Professor Alden, but on his terms, with clear boundaries to protect her childhood and well-being. She had a gift that deserved to be nurtured, but she also deserved to be a child. With that resolution, he turned off the light, leaving his brilliant daughter to dream of algorithms and quantum patterns, and perhaps, occasionally, of just being 12. Morning light spilled across Atlas Tech's newly renovated Security Operations Center. 3 months had passed since Ellis McGraw's arrest, and the company had undergone a remarkable transformation. Gone were the sterile glass partitions and cold minimalist design. In their place stood collaborative workspaces filled with diverse teams of engineers working together in a more open, inclusive environment. At the center of it all stood Imani, pointing to a holographic display of Atlas Tech's new infrastructure, Quantum Lock. The system represented a quantum leap in security architecture, a hybrid AI security interface that could identify and rewrite vulnerabilities in real time, adapting to threats as they emerged. The neural pathways create multiple authentication layers, Imani explained to the small group gathered around her. Each one uses a different verification method, so even if attackers breach one layer, the others remain secure. The team listening to her wasn't composed of Atlas Tech's veteran engineers. Instead, it was a group of young developers, all from backgrounds similar to Imani's. talented kids from underprivileged communities who had been handpicked by Arthur and Harold through a new outreach program. Lena stood at the back of the room, watching with quiet pride. Under her leadership as CTO, Atlas Tech had not only recovered, but evolved. The company culture had shifted from cutthroat competition to collaborative innovation, with a renewed focus on finding talent in unexpected places. "That's enough for today," Lena announced as Imani finished her explanation. "Remember, the code challenge is due by Friday. Imani and I will review your submissions next week." As the young interns gathered their things, Arthur entered the room looking more relaxed than anyone could remember seeing him. His perpetual suit had been replaced by a casual button-down, and he even smiled occasionally, a sight that still startled longtime employees. "How's our future workforce coming along?" he asked Lena. "Brilliantly," she replied. "3 of them have already produced code that would put most of our senior developers to shame." Arthur nodded, satisfied. "And our star pupil?" he asked, glancing at Imani, who was helping one of the younger interns with a complex algorithm. "Thriving," Lena said. "Professor Alden says she's mastered concepts that his graduate students struggle with. And she's fantastic with the other kids, patient, encouraging, never condescending." "Unlike some CTOs I've known," Arthur remarked, dryly thinking of Brian. Meanwhile, across town at Helix One headquarters, the atmosphere was markedly different. Emergency meetings had become the norm, as the company struggled to contain the fallout from Ellis's arrest. Their stock had plummeted, clients were fleeing, and worst of all, their technological edge was rapidly disappearing. Their new quantum lock system launches next week, the acting CEO informed his grim-faced executive team. "Early reviews call it revolutionary and unhackable. We're 3/4 behind in development, and our top security architects just resigned to join Atlas Tech." "What about our legal options?" someone asked. "Limited," came the terse reply. "Our connection to Ellis and Brian has been established beyond doubt. We're lucky the federal investigation is focused on them personally, or we'd be facing criminal charges as a company." As Helix One floundered, Atlas Tech soared. The final preparations for Quantum Lock's launch were underway, with Imani's team putting the finishing touches on the system's self-learning capabilities. Yet, despite the company's success, Imani found herself at the center of growing public attention. Tech blogs featured stories about her. Educational programs requested interviews. The 12-year-old genius narrative had taken on a life of its own. "Are you sure you're okay with this?" Harold asked one evening as they reviewed yet another speaking invitation, this time for a national youth tech conference. Imani nodded slowly. "I think it's important, Dad. When I was younger, I never saw anyone who looked like me doing this kind of work. Maybe some other kid will see me and realize they can do it too." Harold smiled, though concern still lingered in his eyes. "Just remember, you can always say no. Your worth isn't measured by how many conferences you attend or articles they write about you." The Youth Tech Conference was held in a converted warehouse downtown, filled with excited young people from across the country. When Imani took the stage, the audience fell silent, hundreds of eyes fixed on the small figure with the bright orange headband. "Most people see me as the kid who saved a big company," she began, her voice steady despite her nerves. "But that's not really the whole story. The truth is, I'm just one of thousands of invisible kids with talent who never get noticed." As she spoke from the heart about opportunity, access, and the power of believing in yourself, the audience hung on every word. By the time she finished, many were on their feet, applauding not just for Imani but for the possibility she represented. That brilliance could emerge from anywhere, if only given the chance to shine. Back at Atlas Tech, preparations for the Quantum Lock launch reached their final stage. The system had passed every security test with flying colors, and pre-orders from clients had already exceeded projections by 300%. In a rare moment of quiet, Arthur found himself alone with Harold, on the executive balcony watching the sunset paint the city skyline in shades of gold. "Your daughter has changed this company," Arthur said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Not just through her technical contributions, but by changing how we see potential." Harold nodded. "She has that effect on people. I've been thinking, Arthur continued, about how easily we missed her brilliance. How many others have we overlooked because they didn't fit our narrow definition of talent? He turned to face Harold directly. I judge people too easily, by their appearance, their background, their job title. You showed me I was blind to brilliance that didn't wear a suit. Harold smiled slightly. We all have our blind spots. Inside, the final system checks for quantum lock continued through the night. Lena and her team methodically verified each component, ensuring everything was perfect for the morning launch. Imani, who had been granted special permission to stay late, moved between workstations offering suggestions and encouragement. At 2:17 a.m., an alert flashed on the main monitoring screen. We've got a recursion loop in the authentication module, called out one of the engineers. It's causing a cascade failure in the eastern server cluster. Lena rushed to the terminal, scanning the error logs with growing concern. Isolate the affected nodes. We need to contain this before it spreads. But the problem was already multiplying, jumping from one server to another as the recursion loop replicated itself throughout the system. By dawn, nearly 20% of Quantum Lock's core functions were offline or severely compromised. What happened? Arthur demanded, having been called in early as the situation deteriorated. It looks like a design flaw in the authentication loop, Lena explained. Exhaustion, evident in her voice, something we missed in testing. The recursive function keeps calling itself without a proper exit condition, eventually overloading the system resources. Arthur's face darkened. Can it be fixed? Yes, but not quickly. We're looking at a minimum of 48 hours to isolate the problem, redesign the authentication protocol, and implement the fix. The launch is in 6 hours, Arthur reminded her unnecessarily. I know. Lena ran a hand through her disheveled hair. We need to postpone. As the team scrambled to contain the damage, Imani sat alone in a corner, staring at lines of code on her tablet. The recursion loop had originated in a section she had designed, an elegant solution that had worked flawlessly in testing, but failed catastrophically at scale. It's my fault, she whispered, when Lena found her. I wrote that module. I missed something. Lena sat beside her. Hey, look at me. Every engineer makes mistakes. Every single one of us. That's how we learn and grow. But the launch will happen when it happens, Lena said firmly. One delayed launch won't define Atlas Tech, and it certainly won't define you. She hesitated, then added, You know, for years I was the only woman in most tech meetings I attended. I made mistakes, got overlooked, had to fight twice as hard to be heard, but each setback taught me something valuable. What? Imani asked quietly. That you're allowed to mess up. That's how greatness is born. Not from perfection, but from learning and adapting and trying again. Slowly, Imani nodded, her natural resilience reasserting itself. We need to fix the recursion loop. Yes, we do, Lena agreed. And I think we should start by completely reimagining the authentication sequence. Your original design was brilliant, but maybe there's an even better approach we haven't considered yet. Together, they rejoined the team, who had set up an emergency war room to tackle the problem. Arthur had already announced the launch delay to the press, framing it as final refinements to ensure optimal performance, rather than acknowledging the serious flaw. What followed was an all-night effort that would later become legend within Atlas Tech. Imani, Lena, and the young development team worked in rotating shifts, each taking turns to rest while others continued coding. Harold brought food and encouragement, setting up a makeshift break area where exhausted engineers could recharge. Sunrise came and went. Progress was made, setbacks encountered, new approaches tried and discarded. Through it all, Imani's creativity and perseverance never flagged. When one solution failed, she immediately began exploring alternatives, her mind constantly shifting, perspectives to find new angles of attack. It's not about forcing the system to work, she explained during a brief break. It's about understanding what it wants to do naturally, then guiding it in the right direction. Finally, with just 90 minutes until the rescheduled launch, the team implemented a completely redesigned authentication protocol. Gone was the recursive loop that had caused so much trouble. In its place stood an elegant, self-limiting function that accomplished the same goal without the risk of runaway processes. Final system check complete, Lena announced as the clock ticked down. All modules green. Quantum lock is ready for deployment. A cheer went up from the exhausted team. Imani, who had barely slept in 36 hours, managed a tired smile as Lena gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze. "You did it," Lena said softly. "We did it," Imani corrected. "All of us together." The launch proceeded flawlessly. Quantum lock went live across Atlas Tech's global network, immediately detecting and neutralizing 17 potential vulnerabilities that had been lurking undetected in client systems. More impressively, when a final automated attack was launched from an anonymous server, later traced to a Helix One contractor, Quantum lock identified the threat in real time and rewrote its own defense protocols to block it completely. Within hours, technology news sites were hailing Quantum lock as the most significant security advancement of the decade. Atlas Tech's stock price surged to an all-time high. Competitors scrambled to understand how the system could adapt so effectively to threats it had never encountered before. At the center of this triumph stood Imani, no longer just the janitor's kid, or even the child prodigy, but recognized as a genuine innovator whose vision had transformed an industry. When interviewed by a major tech publication, she simply smiled and said, "I just love solving puzzles. This one was just a little bigger than most." 6 months after Quantum lock's successful launch, Atlas Tech had not only recovered from the sabotage crisis but had emerged stronger than ever. The company's market value had tripled, its client base had expanded globally, and its corporate culture had become a case study in how diversity and inclusion could drive innovation. Arthur sat in his office, reviewing the latest quarterly reports, with satisfaction. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, looking up to see Harold entering with a stack of documents. "These need your signature," Harold said, placing the papers on Arthur's desk. "The final approvals for the education initiative." Arthur nodded and began signing. The initiative, officially named the Imani Wilson Foundation for Technology Education, would provide resources, mentorship, and scholarships to underprivileged youth with aptitude for STEM fields. "Have you given any more thought to my offer?" Arthur asked as he signed the last document. "Director of R&D mentorship would suit you perfectly. The salary and benefits package is substantial." Harold shook his head with a small smile. "I appreciate it, Arthur, I truly do. But I'm right where I belong, teaching kids in the community center we've established. Not everyone needs a corner office to make an impact." Arthur studied him thoughtfully. "You know, a year ago I would have thought that was false modesty. Now I understand its wisdom." In the months since Quantum lock's launch, Harold had indeed declined several lucrative positions within Atlas Tech. Instead, he had helped establish a community technology center in his neighborhood, where he taught basic coding and computer skills to local children. The center was funded by Atlas Tech, but operated independently, a condition Harold had insisted upon. "How's Imani handling the spotlight?" Arthur asked, changing the subject. "Better than most adults would," Harold replied with pride. "She's turned down interviews with major networks and elite school recruiters. Says she wants to focus on her work and her education without distractions." Despite numerous offers from prestigious institutions, Stanford, MIT, and several tech investors had all attempted to recruit her, Imani had opted to continue her education through a specialized STEM program near home. She still worked with Atlas Tech 3 days a week and spent weekends at Professor Alden's Innovation Lab, but maintained a balance that allowed her to simply be a teenager sometimes. Elsewhere in the building, Lena was concluding her 6-month review with the board of directors. As expected, they voted unanimously to remove the interim from her CTO title. "The technical innovations under your leadership have been exceptional," Lawrence Porter acknowledged. "And your insistence on hiring from diverse backgrounds has yielded unexpected benefits in problem-solving approaches." "Talent exists everywhere," Lena replied simply. "We just needed to look beyond the usual places." Under Lena's direction, Atlas Tech had implemented a revolutionary hiring approach, focusing less on prestigious degrees and more on demonstrated aptitude and creative thinking. The result was a far more diverse workforce that consistently outperformed industry standards in innovation metrics. As Atlas Tech thrived, Helix One struggled to remain relevant. The final blow came when federal investigators raided their headquarters, uncovering evidence of corporate espionage that went far beyond Brian and Ellis's activities. Within weeks, their CEO resigned in disgrace, their stock collapsed, and their most valuable intellectual property was tied up in litigation. The contrast between the two companies couldn't have been starker. One built on exploitation and shortcuts, the other rebuilt on integrity and inclusion. Business schools began featuring Atlas Tech as a case study in ethical leadership and crisis management. After 5 years at the helm of Atlas Tech's spectacular recovery and growth, Arthur made an announcement that shocked the tech world. He was stepping down as CEO. At a heartfelt farewell gathering, he explained his decision to the company he had built. "When I founded Atlas Tech, I wanted to create something revolutionary," he told the assembled employees. "What I didn't understand then was that true revolution isn't just about technology, it's about people. About seeing potential where others see nothing. About listening to voices that have been silenced." He glanced at Imani and Harold, who stood quietly at the back of the room. "I've learned more about leadership in the past year than in the previous 20. Now it's time for me to share those lessons with others." Arthur's next chapter involved mentoring other CEOs on ethical leadership and inclusion, helping them understand that diversity wasn't just a moral imperative, but a competitive advantage. His experience with Imani had transformed his approach to talent recognition, and he was determined to spread that transformation throughout the industry. Several weeks after Arthur's departure, Harold visited the small janitor's closet where he had once worked. The space had been transformed, the mops and cleaning supplies replaced by workstations and digital displays. A simple plaque beside the door read, "The Imani Initiative, where unseen talent finds its voice." The room served as an incubator for ideas from employees at all levels of the company. Anyone from executives to maintenance staff could submit innovations for consideration. The best were developed and implemented, regardless of their source. Harold stood in the doorway, remembering the nights he had spent cleaning while Imani did homework in the corner, how far they had come from those quiet evenings. And yet, the essential truth remained unchanged. Brilliance could emerge from anywhere, if only given the chance to flourish. 5 years passed. Atlas Tech continued to thrive under new leadership that maintained the inclusive principles established during the recovery. Helix One eventually dissolved, its assets acquired by smaller competitors who built something better from its remains. On a bright spring morning, 17-year-old Imani Wilson stood on a stage before hundreds of young women, primarily girls of color, all wearing orange headbands identical to her own. The headband had become a symbol of the movement she had inadvertently started, a buzzwise reminder that genius didn't require privilege, just opportunity. "When I was 12, she began, her voice confident and clear. "I was invisible to most of the world. Just the janitor's kid, sitting quietly in the corner. No one expected anything remarkable from me because no one was looking in my direction." The audience listened intently as she continued. "But invisibility can be a superpower if you use it right. It lets you observe, learn, and prepare without pressure or expectations. So when your moment comes, and it will come, you're ready to step forward and show the world exactly who you are." The young women nodded, many taking notes or recording her words for later inspiration. Each had been selected for the Imani Initiative's mentorship program, identified as having exceptional potential in STEM fields, despite lacking traditional advantages. As Imani concluded her keynote, a familiar figure watched from the back of the hall. Arthur Kendall, now dedicated full-time to educational equity and tech, smiled as he witnessed the continuation of a legacy far more meaningful than market share or profit margins. Later that evening, in her bedroom, Imani sat by the window with her notebook. Despite her accomplishments and growing influence, this private ritual remained unchanged, sketching new ideas in the quiet moments before sleep, imagining possibilities that others hadn't yet considered. She paused, looking up at the night sky visible through her window. The world of technology had been transformed, in part through her contributions. But there was still so much more to do, so many more barriers to break down. Okay, she whispered to herself, turning to a fresh page. What if I made the world even safer? Her pencil touched the paper, and a new idea began to take shape. What brilliance might you be overlooking in the people you pass by every day? If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful tales of hidden potential that will make you see the world differently.